back to Morbid Michigan. Today's video is a lot less morbid than usual, but I still think that you all will find it pretty interesting because it is conspiracy based. And it's based on a phenomenon recently which happened that a lot of us here in Michigan experienced and saw. So first off, let me give a disclaimer. I'm not a scientist by any means, but I did do a good amount of research into this, and I want to try to explain it in a way that people will be able to actually understand. So many of you here in Michigan, and across the world really, got to see a unique treat last weekend.
Aurora borealis?
Aurora borealis. At this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within your kitchen.
Yes.
That's it?
No.
And if you missed it, I'm sorry. It was pretty awesome. I took some pictures, and usually I do see the stars up in the sky at night from where I live, but I have a fair amount of light pollution kind of blocking a lot of stuff off. So I was genuinely shocked to see something like this here. I live in like southeast Michigan, near Detroit. So, you know, there's a lot of buildings, a lot of factories. The stars, not nearly as well as someone up north might be able to see them. So to just suddenly see the pink and like swirliness in the sky was pretty mind-boggling. And it was even stranger because I took up my camera with my phone and I could see it like when I took the picture a lot better than I was able to actually see it with my naked eyeballs. Scientists say that this unusually large area of visibility was because this was the largest solar storm we've had in more than 20 years. But there are theories going around that say that other forces were at play. I saw a theory on Facebook that said that this aurora borealis was not naturally occurring. It was instead man-made. So I had heard of HAARP before I came across this post on Facebook, but I still didn't really understand what any of this was or what they were talking about. So I figured I'd try to look into it and give you guys an explanation to determine if this conspiracy theory is realistic or not. First, we need to understand exactly what causes the northern lights. Or, you know, the southern lights if you see them down south, which not south like Georgia or Kentucky, I'm talking about south of the equator. So what happens is we have the Earth and we have the sun. And particles come flying out of the sun, all crazy, going towards the Earth's magnetosphere, which is the, you know, atmosphere around the Earth. And this is what pushes stuff back out. It's like a filter, kinda. So these particles go right into the curvature of the magnetosphere, and they get redirected, but the force of gravity draws them back up, so they're going up to the North Poles and the South Poles. And that is where they start to become trapped in the ionosphere and start colliding with nitrogen and oxygen particles, and they explode, and it creates the beautiful display we know as the aurora borealis. And there's a pretty cool science to it, so different types of particles and temperatures will create the different greens and blues and pinks and purples that you see, but long story short, that's what an aurora borealis is, and that's how it happens. So this time, why did people across the world get to see the northern lights rather than just those isolated areas? Well, that is because the particles that were being blasted off the sun were way more powerful than what we would normally see. There was a giant sunspot cluster, splattering the sunlight all at people, and there was what's called a coronal mass ejection. So we had that happening, just at a much larger thing. It was a big thing. Sun doing a big thing. Get it? You understand? So the Scientific American said the sunspot cluster was almost as powerful as the ones that triggered the Carrington Event back in 1859. And this was a huge geomagnetic storm that knocked out telegraph communication, which was the main form of communication at the time. So people had very limited ways to communicate with each other. It was just crazy. But people were able to see the aurora borealis all the way down in places like Cuba and Hawaii, right at the equator, which is very unusual. That puts into perspective just how intense this solar storm was that happened between the 8th and the 11th. So if we go back to that Facebook post, what they were postulating is that humans caused the aurora borealis this time. And a lot of you might be scratching your heads and thinking, do we have the technology to do that? Can we control the weather? HAARP is located in Fairbanks, Alaska, and has for the past 2 decades been the topic of many conspiracies. It's short for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. Scientists at HAARP research the Earth's ionosphere and call itself America's only state-of-the-art radio research facility. HAARP was for the most part pretty private about what went on up until about a decade ago, when they started letting people come in for open houses, tour the facility, get to talk to the scientists, but it was more private than most publicly funded research programs. So HAARP was founded by the US Air Force, the Navy, and DARPA. So you can tell it's got some military background to it.
All the military have communications, surveillance, navigation systems whose paths either traverse the ionosphere or reflect from it. And so we need to be very careful about what we know about it and how we study it. What we're interested in is what is the effect of a large input of energy on the ionosphere.
DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. In 2015, the government cut off funding, and HAARP is now owned and operated by the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. The biggest feature of HAARP is its high-power, high-frequency transmitter. In a presentation, Chief RF Systems Design Engineer at HAARP, Steve Floyd, says it's capable of temporary ionosphere modification for radio science research. So kinda controlling the weather a little bit.
This is a picture of artificial aurora, if you will. This is HAARP transmitting just a carrier. And I could never see this with my bare eye, but this is from a high sensitivity CCD camera. And some folks said they could see this with their bare eye. Why that structure is there, I don't know, but that's just the HAARP beam not being moved, just sort of stimulating light out of the ionosphere. It's amazing what you can do with a 5 gigawatt ERP, but it doesn't hurt anything, no effect on weather, no conspiracy theories are true.
Clearly the technology is there, at least somewhat, but the aurora was massive, and it must have been really strong for people to be able to see it even in areas of high levels of light pollution. So the question is, can HAARP possibly create an aurora that big? Back in 2023, they were doing experiments that they said had the potential to create an air glow, this artificial aurora, that could be visible up to 300 miles from the HAARP facility. Even though that is definitely quite a ways, it's a far cry from being able to be seen all the way down in Florida. One thing that people consider to be proof that HAARP created the Northern Lights was seen in a press release that was sent out by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, which said that HAARP was going to be doing research, guess when? May 8th through May 10th. So when people started seeing this and it started circulating online, everyone's thoughts was, well, they can create an aurora borealis. They're doing stuff on the days that we saw this massive event happen. Obviously they had something to do with it, and I honestly bought into that as well. But then I started thinking about it, and there was undoubtedly some crazy solar stuff happening. So we gotta keep in mind that correlation doesn't always equal causation. You know, I want to believe crazy conspiracies as much as the next person. However, we gotta look at it from both sides. So forgive me if you do believe this theory, but now I'm gonna bring in some evidence that I think maybe would say otherwise. Another thing that HAARP does is it allows radio enthusiasts to listen in on their experiments. In fact, they encourage them to, and to send in any anomalies that transpire. So clearly, what HAARP does when it comes to research and their experiments is pretty public if they're sending out a press release to all their people in the radio club who listen in. So I feel like it must not have been a big secret thing going on. They literally said for people to listen to this specific experiment. But at the same time, magnetic storms can create radio and satellite interruptions. So if something was going on, would they have been able to hear it? However, by this theory that is saying that if HAARP created the aurora borealis, then that's saying that the sun didn't create the aurora borealis. So that doesn't really make any sense. So I can definitely see why people might think that HAARP had something to do with this very unusual display of the Northern Lights. So I feel like there's only circumstantial evidence that HAARP was creating the Northern Lights. And there's a lot more definitive evidence pointing at solar storms. So I think just because HAARP was researching the ionosphere that day doesn't necessarily mean they were casting particles up there to create this magnificent, widespread aurora borealis. But anyways, let me know what you think about HAARP and the northern lights and solar flares. Let me know in the comments if you think that HAARP had anything to do with it, or if you think that it was just a really awesome astronomical occurrence. As always, thank you for watching, and have a grave day.
Seymour! The house is on fire!
No, Mother, it's just the northern lights.
Well, Seymour, you are an odd fellow, but I must say, you steam a good ham.